Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of AFMX. My name's Ivan Weiner, Executive Director of the Albuquerque Film and Music Experience. On behalf of AFMX, our Board of Directors, and the entire staff, welcome to AFMX 2021, the virtual edition. Before we get started with our next event, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsors, AFME Foundation, Albuquerque Film Office, and the film liaison, Cindy McCrossan, Albuquerque the Magazine, Bernalillo County Commissioner Stephen Michael Quezada, Breza Terrena Olive Oil, Comcast NBC Universal, Real Solutions Airport Meet and Greet Service, Sunny 505, the Baker Law Group, University of New Mexico Film and Digital Arts, Wells Fargo, Yamaha Entertainment Group, Juska Road Productions. For a complete lineup of all of our events and for tickets, go ahead and visit our website at afmxnm.com. We're in for a great day and kicking it off with an amazing center stage conversation. It's the first of the series. We have Joshua Michael Stern, Genevieve Trainor, just really, really proud of this particular event kicking off our series. I want to introduce Kira Seipler, our Director of Operations.
Hi, thank you, Ivan. And yes, Genevieve and Josh are two of my favorite people. I am so excited about this center stage conversation. Just a couple of notes. Please note that to our audience members, you will be allowed to ask questions during this center stage conversation. Just type your question in the chat box and we will do our very best to answer all of your questions. Please note, all the films, the Q&As, and the center stage conversations will be recorded and available online through October 11th. Please welcome Genevieve Trainor. Genevieve Trainor is a professional actor and a former public relations VP. She has produced and directed multiple video shoots, including a first ever talent-based video of its kind for one of the world's largest companies, and acted in multiple award-winning films. After recently moving back to New Mexico from the Seattle area, Genevieve remains involved in the film industry on both the business and on-camera sides. Genevieve is a finalist in the 2020-2021 New Mexico Actors Showcase, hosted by the New Mexico Film Foundation, and is represented by Southwest Artist Group. Please welcome Genevieve Trainor.
Thanks so much, Kira. Appreciate the introduction. As you all know from Ivan, we'll be talking with Joshua Michael Stern today. Josh is a writer, director, producer, and of course, showrunner, the topic of today's center stage conversation. He is the creator of Lionsgate series Graves. His debut feature, What Never Was, starring Sir Ian McKellen, Aaron Eckhart, and Jessica Lange, opened the Toronto International Film Festival. He also wrote, produced, and directed Jobs and Swing Vote. So Jobs is a biopic starring Ashton Kutcher, and it is about the early years of Steve Jobs and the development of the Mac computer. Swing Vote is a Capra-esque fable starring Kevin Costner as a working class New Mexican who single-handedly decides the presidential election. So his current credits, current projects are the Paramount Plus original series Why Women Kill. And also he's in development for multiple projects. Sold Salem is burning to NBC Universal. So we're looking forward to talking to Josh more about what you're currently working on. And fun fact about you, your grandmother, of course, was a studio executive who discovered Marlon Brando. So clearly, clearly the industry gene runs in your family, and we'll get started specifically, you know, on your background and how you came about the path to becoming a showrunner. So if you wouldn't just mind just starting with your beginning journey in the industry.
Well, when I was a kid, I was. By the way, just is my sound okay?
You're good.
Okay, good. Yeah, when I was a kid, my grandmother was a Broadway producer, and she had been an executive with David Selznick. So I was brought up with a lot of theatrical people and actors, and so I was sort of taken with the industry at a very young age. And then I really sort of directing, I started directing as a kid, like a lot of directors do, and, making little 8mm films when I was like 11 years old, 12 years old, and started acting a little bit as well. And then I went to BU and directed theater and film and then stopped any acting around that period of time. And, I think when you start off and you're in college and you're thinking about what it is you want to do, and, you have to think about the different circuitous routes to get to what you want. Because unlike other professions where there really is a kind of chronological order with a final outcome of that, whether it's schooling or graduate schooling, or whether you're working your way up the ladder within an industry, all the stuff of creativity is a little more random, and it feels a little more impossible because there really is no formula. So when I was in college, I had decided I wanted to direct film, and I thought that the best way to direct film was to write film, because I understood that if you could write something that had value that multiple people wanted, then you could attach yourself as a director as part of that package, and hopefully at some point someone would bite. So I got out of college, I started writing a lot of film, got little jobs here and there, like, Amityville Horror sequel, you're rewriting this, writing my first horror film. You always start with genre stuff usually when you start writing, less character. You're just, fielding your oats, you're trying to get the structure of a film. So I had some success, and really in my late 20s, I started feeling like it's time I could actually start directing. I felt comfortable enough. I didn't feel quite ready. And then I directed Never Was, because I wrote a script and more than one person wanted it, and I got my agent, and my career started. And, as you start going through your career, whether it was my films, like you mentioned them, at New Mexico, which was my second film, but, I have such a soft spot that I brought my TV series from Epix for a few years to New Mexico as well. But you start off in film, and it was around doing jobs that I started to sense that the direction was going towards streamers. So I very quickly pivoted, because I thought, well, that's the future. Little did I know that it would become everything. We thought it would be an addendum to what we were doing. We thought it would be additive, like an HBO, but we would always have film. There was never a thought, even 4 years ago, that there would be such a bifurcation, where we thought there'd be always a bifurcation. We always thought there would be, little did I know a few years later, amplified, enhanced by the pandemic, that it would almost all go into the TV. Like now, I think going to be kind of hard to unwind that. Having said that, I started show running and started getting my bearings in TV world and running a room and developing shows, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm also directing, but for the most part, I am show running.
So let's talk about the definition and responsibilities of showrunner. As you see it, what do you do as a showrunner? What makes an effective showrunner?
A showrunner is very much like the overall creative producer of the show. So they are responsible. Usually, it's the person who creates the show, but not always. I am, for example, on a couple of shows that I did not create, but I'm running. But very often, the creator of the show is the showrunner of the show. The showrunner of the show is the person in charge of what I would say is the thematic, creative Bible of the show and the direction of it. And they're in charge not only of beating out the arc of the show, hiring the writers for the writers' room, which is the hallmark and the hub of all shows, the writers that get together. But beyond the writers, you're casting. You're in charge of the casting of the show, the production of the show, keeping it under budget, making sure that you amortize your budget per episode so that you can hit those marks, which is very, very important, and ends up being crucial. Hiring the directors of the show, setting the tone of the filming of the show. In essence, creating the modus operandi of everything that's going on is really up to you. And then a successful show lands on the showrunner very often, and his creative vision for what's going to happen. And it's a lot about what your vision of what the show can be, which is tricky because, shows are hard to do and they're expansive and there's a lot of story. Anyone who's ever written a screenplay knows that it's hard enough to try to find, well, what are the characters? What are the arcs of this 90-page treatment? Well, now imagine, 11 hours of TV, 13 hours, and streamers right now are very much like extended films. What you see on Netflix or HBO, they defy a definition, which is why they don't like to call themselves TV, but it's being seen on TV. So really, it is the person in charge of the entire creative process and production process of a television show, whether they created it or whether they were hired to run a show that someone else created. Sometimes a younger writer will come on and have no experience, so they'll partner, or sometimes, you'll need to kind of help out, and then there's different positions within the writer's room and so on.
So Josh, what I'm hearing you say is you have to be skilled as a showrunner at the bird's eye view of everything going on, and also know the details of everything from, which cast members you're going to go with. So you have to be involved in quite a few detailed oriented decisions as well.
Yeah, I mean, you really are in charge of, you're interfacing with the studio and the network. There's usually the network and the studio. The studio is producing it. The network is the one that's bought it and is streaming it. You are in charge of ultimately your partnership with this, meaning everything has to be approved, but you're the one saying, I want this actor, these actors. You're also in charge of casting throughout the process. So you may like an actor, but not have enough money in the budget. And so you're constantly fighting for the things that you want. In my shows, I'm very big on needle drops in music. So I'm constantly fighting for pulling money from this department so I can have this, Rolling Stone song, or also sometimes it's fighting for the writers you want in the writer's room because they're expensive or you don't have them much money. And as it should be right now, it's also balancing diversity within all levels of the process, from the writer's room to the end, making sure that it reflects culturally, diversely, the society and the world, not just the show, but the world of the industry. So you're not, so you really are the person who has to have the bird's eye view, but also the person who's breaking the show. Breaking an episode is basically the terminology which just says we sit in a room and 6 or 8 writers get there at 10 a.m. And, one of the things that's the most difficult for writers when they first enter a writer's room on a TV show is this kind of notion that you're brought up to feel that your idea is your intellectual property, meaning, new writers, they rush to the WGA and they register their script, and no one should hear this because they may steal it. It's my idea, it's my show, and it's ingrained. And I always had that experience as when I started out writing as well. Like, I wake up one day and I think, oh, I have an idea for a movie or a show, and I'm going to walk in someplace and have them, pitch it to them and maybe have them give me $50 million to make it because it's an idea, But in a writer's room, it really is writing by socialism. It's everybody's idea is equal and it is shared and it is not exclusive to that writer. So if there's 8 writers and this writer is writing the episode, but this writer in the room has the best idea for that episode, this writer still gets the Emmy. You're all giving the ideas, you're all breaking the episodes, you're all saying, well, this storyline can go here. What if he kills this character? What if he doesn't kill this character? What if she ends up being his daughter? Well, there's and then you try to you're breaking the series, which is complicated because you're following each storyline, your A story, your B story, that, all the different character stories throughout. And you're trying to find a cohesive and exciting twists and, cliffhangers. And, it's not quite what it used to be, because they used to make 22 episodes, 25 episodes of network TV. That's insane. Now it's, 10 to 13 episodes, which is a little more, you're able to have a little more control over the quality, because you could spend a little more time on it. And you're not doing things you are still doing things last minute. I mean, I'm always constantly writing at the very end, the scene, you slaved over for the last 5 months, and you rewrite it like the day of. But, that's, I don't know if I answered anything. I
No,
went off.
that's really helpful. Can you talk about that change? Why the change from 22 episodes to 10, 13 episodes? Is that
Well, because the advent of streamers, we
enough?
have, we have Hulu, Netflix, Amazon, Apple, HBO Max, Paramount Plus, Disney, it goes on. Epix, we have all these new streamers, and they really operate on the 8 to 10 basically episode order, which allows it to be more contained. The networks still have much higher episode counts, but they're not quite as high as they used to be. And that's for cost, and also for competition. I really do think people's attention span has gotten to a point where it's more challenging, and
Right. So we have a question on that note, Josh, for you from the audience. How do you respond to a department that sees itself as being independent and unbeholding to another department? Has that been your experience?
Department that is independent.
So I would imagine this question relates to a team that feels like they have more ownership or more authority in making a decision. Has that been your experience?
When you say department, do you mean like production department, or do you mean TV department, studio network? Can you reread the question?
Sure. And maybe if you can get some clarification. Okay, yes. So the person says, yes, production within TV.
And can you reread the question?
So how do you respond to a department that sees itself as being independent and unbeholding to another department? So production within.
Well, in the end, in TV, that doesn't exist as much, because all departments are beholden to the mandate of the show. They're independent in so much that their say is weighed independently, but everything is a collaboration. Now, having said that, a studio or a network ultimately has the veto. They try to be creative friendly, they try to be nice to you, and they try to be but if an actor isn't working, or one of your choices isn't working, or they don't like an edit of it, you take their notes. You have to take their notes. I mean, everybody is working for somebody, right? So that's the nature of every business you're ever in. Even when there's kind of this notion that people get into the creative realm and they have control over their vision, and that's not true, because it's commerce still. It's still a business. Often a network will want you to tone down something, whether it's sexuality or drug use, or, I developed a show for ABC, and in the pilot, the character drank on a plane, but you couldn't see him drinking on the plane. You could see his finger on the bottle, and you could see the hand on the glass, but you couldn't see him physically drinking it. These are the things that you start to, but you have no control over that. But they are paying for it, and they are the ones who are putting it out there, and they're in essence beholden to their advertisers if it's network. If it's not network and it's Netflix, or if it's Hulu or one of these, you have a lot more control. You have a lot more creative control. But then you're really you really are kind of still under the thumb of the people who pay for it. But that's the price you pay. Someone is giving you $40 million to to do a show that you thought of. So you have to collaborate and you have to compromise. I mean, there is a certain amount of compromising. And that also goes to you as a creative person who wants longevity, because you want people to want to work with you, you know? And I think if you want people to want to work with you, you have to be open to their opinions and their side of things. And also, you know, one of the biggest things that I think about sometimes is you have to weigh the importance of any one issue to yourself and to how does this one decision affect the whole. The mistake a lot of people who are in this position do is I think they go to battle for everything, and not everything has its same weight. You know, I don't need, you know, oh my God, I need the nudity in this scene, for example. That's a huge battle that goes on a lot of the time. I'll just use that. You may not, and there really may be no reason for it. Why fight for that? You know, I want my character to swear here, you know, and I'm on Netflix. I should be able to say the F word as much as I want. This character should, and then you realize, well, do I really, all right, I have one this episode. Do I need 3? You know, I mean, you know, these are the little things that you go through. Or I think this character is funny, and they're coming back and saying, no, the humor isn't there. This character is flat. Or, you know, we're not empathetic with this character. We're not on this character's journey. And if you think we should be, is irrelevant. They don't think you are. So then you think about, okay, because there's always room to improve and to bring. So it is always a balancing act. But in the end, in TV, every department and whether it's from the studio down to the art department to the writer's room, you are trying to service the show that has been bought and is being run by the showrunner.
And so it sounds like what you're saying are, you know, some of the important skill sets that are really key, whether you're a writer, director, producer, showrunner. And you know, the keys are collaboration, teamwork, and also, as a former boss that I had always used to say, and it stuck with me, is pitch and detach. So anything you do, you don't.
That's very hard to do. I mean, but it's important.
Yeah.
And also, you know, ego. A lot of what you're doing if you're a showrunner is you're managing people's feelings because they get hurt a lot. It's a tough industry because we tell ourselves the story that our ideas are reflective of us as people and extensions of us. So and we generally do that, which is a hard thing to break.
Yeah.
And when somebody criticizes that idea, it's hard not to break that, to relate that to a criticism of us for having the idea, especially an idea that you spend the whole night thinking is great. So someone might come in, it happens all the time. Okay, I got to start. I had a dream. I had a pitch, and I go, I will say, it's really smart, and that we can maybe use that, but I don't think that works here.
Mm-hmm.
That person, then I move on. But that person might just be sitting there for 9 hours thinking, oh, you know, they may get hurt. And we all come to a writer's room and collaboration in whatever you do in life. We all come to that collaboration. And that collaboration could be a relationship you're in, or it could be a work relationship or a writer's room. We all come to it with whatever wounds and baggage we have from our upbringing and how we perceive the world and our self-esteem in the world. And part of the process of learning is to understand what is personal, what's in your control, what is really reflective of you, or what's reflective, you know. So it's really hard. And also, don't forget, a lot of people have a hard time public speaking. Why do they have a hard time public speaking? Well, it's not just because they're speaking in front of people that will make you nervous. It's because you're expressing your idea, and you want that idea to be received well, because that will be a confirmation of you. You are exposing yourself in a big way. When you're in a writer's room or you're pitching, because a writer's room is constantly pitching, you're exposing yourself to a thought, and ultimately it's subjective. Because I will say that 7 out of 10 thoughts could be the direction of the show or this episode or the character within the episode. But in the end, the showrunner makes the decision whether that's the direction we're going to go in. And then you have to then literally go, okay, and then within the next 20 minutes, come up with another idea or riff off of somebody else's idea.
And so on that note, a good segue to a question from the audience is, let's say you really have an idea that that winning idea you really want to, you want the show to retain. How would you decide what's an idea worth fighting for? How do you, how do you pick and choose your battles as a writer?
I think you have to understand, it all goes back to character. Who are the characters? In TV, when you pitch a show for TV and you're pitching it, you have to lay out all of the characters and the dimensions of the characters, because whatever your story is, it's Breaking Bad. It's about a math teacher who becomes a meth lab maker because he finds out he has cancer one morning. Okay, that's a great concept. That's all plot, right? But that's not 6 years. You have to create that character that's so dynamic that it doesn't matter where the story goes. That character is interesting. So you have to know who your characters are on some level to be making decisions for them within your story. And then what you fight for, in my opinion, are the things that you feel are inherently important to where that character is going to. And sometimes only you know where they're going. At the in my series Graves, second season, at the very end, he was going to chain himself to a nuclear device, a nuclear missile, and I always knew that was going to happen, right? So I had to break and beat out 9 episodes that were going to lead to that moment, right? In my first season, I was going to have his assistant shot, right? So I had to so these were all, so sometimes you know where you're going. So things may not make total sense to somebody seeing the episode. Why we have this guy buying a gun? We don't see him very well. Why are we so close on a character making a phone call, calling in? So these are things that you know that they don't know. And sometimes you have to explain what that is. And there might be disagreement about how the show ends or not, but I think you fight for the things that are inherently important for the big idea. And you let go of the things that are tangential. Like, does this character need to have this idiosyncrasy? Can this character have a husband instead of a boyfriend? Because, and you may fight it and say no, because this person has, commitment issues. But then you might wake up the next morning and go, actually, if they have a husband, there's more at stake in their relationship, meaning a breakup means more married than just a boyfriend. And though I wanted them just to be dating, okay, maybe they should have a kid. Like, all of a sudden you'll give up on that because you could see the upside of the other idea. So sometimes it's a balancing act, all rooted in direction of what your characters are going, and you fight for the things that are important, but you also listen to the criticism of where those things can go wrong. That's a dynamic that people kind of, it's hard to see the forest for the trees when you're an idea sometimes. And you have to sort of be open to pivoting from your original concept to make it better because you see value in a criticism or a constructive criticism.
And you'd mentioned last year when we spoke, the importance of having that holistic character. So it sounds like another part of the answer for the audience member asking this question would be, is this choice based on a well thought out holistic character? If you're wanting to fight for something, does that sum up what you're saying? It's all about character development and really thinking through the aspects of that character and what that character would.
In TV, it's really all about the character, because unlike a movie, which is more plot driven, in TV, you could go 4 years. And the only thing that's not going to change are your characters. Everything else is going to change, And in year 4, which is always a terrible year because you don't know what to do with the characters anymore, but they're the same characters. So if you're not intrigued by your characters to begin with, then there's no reason to follow their journey for such a long period of time. Having said that, I always recommend whoever's starting off in writing that you talk to people about ideas. Like, when I go to my agents or my manager, I usually have 4 or 5 ideas, and I like to go through them all, because sometimes the idea that you think's the best idea is I got to be honest, is like 8 out of 10 times not the best idea. Your third idea is sometimes your best idea. But people get very stuck, and they get very back to how people's self-esteem is very fragile. They don't want anyone to rain on their parade, so they'll spend months on the idea, and it'll be okay, and they won't go very far with it. If they had just spent 9 minutes with somebody and just said, here's my 3 lines on it, and they gave 4 3 lines, I think it would have, like if I was doing Breaking Bad as an example, and I went to someone, I said, okay, I have an idea. He's a math teacher, finds out he has cancer, and in his journey, because he's so good at math, he's a nerd and he's introverted, he's actually has all the skills to become a meth creator, and he starts to become a meth dealer. Then I have another idea about a couple who opens up a B&B, somewhere in Georgia, and their crazy daughter comes home, and then, that's the one I want to do, though. It's this great story. It's about this daughter who was in New York, and she had a lot of bad experiences. So she comes home to the quaint B&B that her parents run, and she can't assimilate. I'd be like, wait. I know you want to do that, but let's roll back to that teacher in the meth lab. That's sort of interesting. No, I know, but that's kind of edgy. I really want to do this kind of, I spend a lot of time and I have 5 scripts. I'm like, I know, but let's roll back to the, that's so for me, it's kind of like what, no idea is precious, and I believe that.
Okay.
And I don't think there's any idea that you have that you should bet the farm on. You should bet the farm on your entire spectrum of your creativity and all of the things that you feel you could do. Because I've had ideas that I've worked on, and you pitch them and no one buys them. Like right now, the industry, it's very tough. Like the pitch environment to buy shows is really rough. My team's like, don't pitch till next year. I mean, it's really, really rough. They're not buying anything. Partly that's because all the stuff they were going to shoot last year for the pandemic got shelved. So they're starting to do that now. So they can't do new things and develop things. But I mean, Bradley Cooper just had a show. No one bought it, and he was attached to it. I mean, it was like things are not getting bought that are obvious shows that should get bought, but no one's spending the money now. Because everyone's trying to figure out what TV is again, and B, they've got so much back order stuff that it has to be the most outrageous package. And even those packages are not selling. It's really rough right now. So it's very hard. So you could go out, you could spend a year on an idea, and within 3 days, it's over. Goodbye, done.
Yeah.
Because you've gone to 6 different Zoom meetings. They've all said no. You're done. Goodbye. That's how fast it happens. So you have to be prepared to have a slate of things that you're working on, and you have to date all your ideas, but you don't marry any of them, and you don't marry them till you're greenlit. And I'm not trying to be cute. I'm being honest. It's like you should be casually dating your ideas, and then when somebody wants to make it, then it's like, okay, that's it. But emotionally, people it's a roller coaster, and they get so, I've always thought that there's a correlation to a gambling addiction to writing sometimes, because people get excited about, it's like when you get a ticket, like a horse bet. So you say, you look at the odds, then you choose the one is going to be the one, and then you go and you get your ticket, and then you wait for your ticket, and then you're thrilled, and you have all of this excitement, and then the race happens, and then 20 seconds later you lose, and you have nothing, and you get very depressed. And most people then get back on that hamster wheel, and they go, well, what about this side? It's the same thing. You get so excited, and you have that one ticket, right? It's your lottery ticket. It's that's what's gonna, and then all of a sudden you go out, you spend months on it, and then it's a Friday, and you go out, and then on a Monday you get a call, they love the writing, but no one is biting.
So be an ideas person.
You have to think of
Yeah.
your career as a writer as a career,
Mhm.
as a multifaceted career with many projects and many ideas, and all of them are good. And you need to bring people into your ideas. Find the person you trust. You know, I have people pitching me ideas all the time,
Mhm.
and you can use their advice or not use their advice. But you should always, before you devote the next year to this one idea, you should, I read an article on I read Wikipedia about this. This is the most interesting real life guy ever, and he's going to make a series that's amazing. And it's not always the case. Sometimes it's the case, but not always.
So what about people who, this is a question from the audience as well. What about a writer who has a pilot? They're not interested in running the show. They're wondering, is there a place for them?
Yes, 100%. In fact, I'm working on 2 or 3 things now. Well, on those, I ended up coming on as as a writer as well, but they came to me with a pilot, and I helped rewrite the pilot with them. But yes, absolutely, 100%. I mean, there's tons of cases of writers who have great pilots, and if they sell it, then they partner with a showrunner, someone like me, and they go out with it, and their first experience is to be a creator on a show, but they don't run the show because but they're the writer in the room with all the other writers, and they're the creator, and or the co-creator. Usually it becomes a co-creator when you bring on a showrunner, but yeah, absolutely.
And where, if they're a writer and they have this story that's developed or an idea, how do they, and this kind of goes into our next section on, you're a writer, you have a project you think is great. What are the important things in a pitch? Is it, what do you look for when you are hearing somebody's pitch?
Well, the thing about me is I look for somebody's pitch, but I also am the person who also pitches sometimes.
Yeah.
And I got to be honest about pitching, and I like partnering because I like a partner who can also. But pitching is terrifying. I mean, I direct as well, so I can say that the worst day of directing is still not as terrifying as pitching. And I don't know why it is so scary. It just really is. And I don't mean that to be daunting. I just mean, I think you feel the stakes are so high. And what you're asking for is so huge. It's like in the 20s when someone would go into a bank and say, I have a farm and all I need is $10 million. But boy, this is going to be a beautiful farm and the house, and we're going to have cattle. It's like you're doing the same thing. I have an idea, and boy, you're going to love this idea. So I think, did you ask me what are the components of the pitch that are good, important?
I think the question could be open to interpretation in terms of, the best way. Is it a particular tool you use? Do you do market research? Do you do, you had mentioned when we spoke last year, you talked about tonal comps. So are those, when you're pitching, are they looking for information on what you know about comps?
So when you're thinking of your show, always think about what I think, and I may be, I'm only a subjective one opinion, right? But I think when you're thinking of a show, you think of how would you market the show on a billboard? What's the visual representation? How simple can you make this visual representation of your show? How are you going to market this show, right? And that comes down to the concept of your show. Can your show be told quickly and cleanly in 3 or 4 sentences, 2 to 3 sentences? Almost every show that's on TV right now, I can think of very few exceptions, and there are exceptions. But as far as the concept of the show, this show takes place on a hotel. There's a show that just sold, which was an Agatha Christie on a ship. What's the concept of your show? What's the idea of your show? Everything I've, My show was about an ex-president who wakes up and realizes everything he did screwed the country up. So he goes on a quest to right his wrongs as an old man. You know, what's the idea of your show? What is the, you know, this show that you mentioned, I saw the show at NBC called The Jester, which is about the fact that after, you know, thousands of years, the royal family brings back the court position of the jester after getting rid of it in the 1700s in a modern context. Like, what is the, or My So Supreme is about a daytime talk show host like a Judge Judy who gets appointed to the Supreme Court. You know, what is the idea of your show? Be able to really sell it with the idea, oh, that's a great concept. That's a great character. Or that's a great character. That's a great family dynamic. Sometimes character dynamic shows like Shameless, ideas like that, you know, come from one's personal experience. Those shows are sometimes best pitched if they're part of your background. Having said that, you still should pitch them, but then you have to really find what is it about these characters. You know, what's the dynamics of the characters? What makes this interesting, and what makes these characters in relation to each other interesting? Because a character in a vacuum isn't interesting. It doesn't make for a show. But this character with this character makes the show. Everything to me is an extension of that old movie and old TV show, The Odd Couple, which a lot of people are way too young to know about. And I'm actually, believe it or not, slightly too young to know about. But The Odd Couple was just literally about a fastidious guy who was all buttoned up, who moved in with his best friend, who was a gambler and a slob. It was so easy. It was so simple. But it was the opposites of that. So within your concept of the show, Walter White is a math nerd in a world of criminals. You know, there's always a sense of fish out of water. Ugly Betty is a girl who's not so, or doesn't perceive herself to be so attractive in the high fashion world. You know, and sometimes it's small things. It's the dynamics that happen within the families that make it interesting. How come this is an interesting family, and what are the dynamics of it? The Sopranos is ultimately about the head of a boss of a family who has a family, you know, but who really has questions and morality questions about what he's doing and about himself as a human being and how does he operate. So it really is a show about a therapist and like it's almost a show about a therapist and a gangster. Now Sopranos is about 100 other things that make it really, really great. But if I'm to try to think about what makes it so interesting, why that character is not like any other gangster that you've seen on TV, is his self-introspection, that he weighed all of his life from his family to the stuff that was going on, and everything had a different look because his outlook was now through the lens of a son who had suffered, with his mother and how all the issues that he had, and so these are all. So if I'm pitching The Sopranos right now, everything that happened in The Sopranos, he whacked a guy. These are not things that make an interesting pitch. Everything that Michael's great, and his girlfriend snitched, so she got killed. I mean, these are things that exist in every single gangster mafia movie that's ever been made. So when you pitch those ideas pre the show being made, right, you're just in a room pitching The Sopranos. You're not this showrunner who could get anything made. You're just you. So what's my in? Because it's not going to be like, well, you should see what happens. You know, they go to strip clubs. Okay, great. Every gangster goes to strip club. Oh yeah, but there's a character named Joey Balls, and they shoot him in the forest. No one's gonna care. But if you say it's about a family and about a father and his children, and about the fact that has panic attacks, and that he has to go to a therapist to figure out what his issues are, yet he still has to make all the decisions that a father has to make and the head of a crime family has to make as he's discovering the truth about himself and his dysfunctions, then there is a little more of a pitch,
And in that, so the holistic character development that makes something like The Sopranos a comp to another gangster show, to your point, but different because of the unique characters. Do you do you plot that out by season? Do you plot out roughly what the
I don't think you, I think you have general ideas.
Yeah.
People who did Breaking Bad, there was a writer's strike, I think, in the middle of season 1. And they famously said they had no idea what they were going to do when it got bought. Like, they had to spend that time they were off figuring it out. You almost never know. You usually know season 1, and you sometimes know season 2, but beyond season 2, it's tough. It's tough to know. And I will say that most shows have that season where you're like, I wasn't crazy about season 3. Like, how every show does, because it's near impossible for anyone to tell me a show, maybe Game of Thrones, someone would say is an exception, where you could say every single season was dynamic and amazing. It's always like, oh, I love I wasn't crazy about season 3 and 4, but 5 was amazing, 6 was great. Season 1 was great, season 1 I liked, but season 2 was amazing. Like sometimes it's the first season. Very often, Seinfeld, blah 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 blah. Tons of shows are never as good the first season. Sometimes they're the best the first season, and some of that has to do with the fact that you're starting, you're constantly creating the universe for these characters, and sometimes those universes work, and sometimes they don't, and sometimes you just don't know. But you have a clock, and you have to write. And in the old days, when there was 25 episodes, it was more of a case of, the beginning of the season was great, then it got a little slow, but the ending was like the 3, 4, and 5, because there were so many episodes. Quality control was hard, but it's hard. But you very rarely, though there are some occasions where where your characters are going, generally. But general doesn't cut it, and you get to the writer's room and you realize, and then sometimes something happens in season 1 you weren't counting on, and then you have to adjust for season 2.
So we have a question too. This is really great advice, Josh, on how to work the pitch, how to separate yourself from your ideas and your writing. Would you say that you have a list of top 3 or 5 things to know in a pitch that you've learned over your years in pitching?
I think number 1 is to be relaxed and conversational. Number 2 is to tell the story like you're telling the story with a bunch of friends at a bar. I'm not mastered this yet. I try to, because I'm more dramatic. So I tend to tell it like a short story, which is another thing you could do. Tell it like a story. You are bringing them into your pitch. You're bringing them in. So part of it is half, retelling of a story that personally, and half this is a retelling of a short story, as if the short story almost happened to you. And sometimes it's like so I think the more you can bring them in, I have a story about, a quick thing is, you could try to find the beginning and middle and end to the story. Like you were telling the story of something that happened to you or a family member. You're not going to be what happened to my mother. And then you tell a 5 to 10 minute story. Your pitch should really be always under the whole thing, 15 minutes, maybe 20 tops. A half hour should be 15 or so. And you start off by, this is the world. These are our characters. Very often you talk about what's going to go on in the season with these characters. How are they going to interact? What are we leading towards? Sometimes you could go into describing the pilot, but that could be more in the pilot. This will happen. We'll discover that, this is that he's the father and she's, the daughter, and then now they have to live together. And through the season, we'll go along the journey as she realizes that he's actually in witness protection, and that he's never told her, and that he ran away when he was a kid and was put in by the government. And like all of a sudden you can figure out what it is, So it's being relaxed. It's telling it like a story, and not me, and telling it like a concise story that has that beginning, middle, and end. try not to meander into things that are off topic. It's about editorializing your story to to its most interesting. I think it's akin to telling a scary story around a campfire, because when you tell a scary story around a campfire, I always think you are building suspense, and you're usually concise, right? And there's something about that which is always, and then, the stories are never that scary. It's like, and the hand was, and the bloody paw, or the murderer was in the basement, or the phone call was coming from inside the house. But it's the build up to what that is that's interesting. Your pitches should all be like campfire stories, even if they're comedies, because you want people to be interested and surprise them. It's all about the surprise. And I never thought of that, by the way, but I just thought of how that's apropos, but I think that is apropos.
That's great. That's really helpful in terms of talking to a friend at a bar. So just recapping what you're saying, just be relaxed first of all when you walk into the pitch as much as possible. Have your beginning, middle, and end, and tell it very succinctly, just as if you're talking at a campfire.
And when you're telling, and also be very intimate with your characters. Have fun describing who these characters are, because the characters are who these people are investing in as much as the plot.
Well, it sounds like too, the other piece in what you're saying is you better be passionate about your project, because that's going to come across. If it's something that you're pitching and you don't,
it is, passion's important. I'm not trying to dismiss passion, but passion's important. But it's just, everyone knows you love your idea, but just tell the idea. Just tell the idea. Don't over dramatize it. Don't go too crazy with it. Don't get too emotional about it. That's the other thing. Don't get overly crazy. They don't trust you as much if you get too crazy. You want to be in control. Just tell your story. Tell it like an idea. Don't do crazy voices. Just tell your idea. Like you were telling someone a great story at a bar, or you were telling a campfire story. Just tell them your idea. And be relaxed. Don't get overly anxious. And by the way, you will be anxious, so do breathing exercises. Lots of hold your breath, release, do whatever you need to do to calm down, short of altering your dimensions, as we say. But calm yourself, and then try to walk in and have just a discussion,
Don't drink a pot of coffee before you go into the interview.
Well, you can do that. Yeah. Well, not necessarily. If you need it, do it. You want to have energy.
So kind of switching gears. Another question. One person says you wear a lot of hats. You've been, writer, director, producer, showrunner, even actor.
No, I'm not. No.
I saw you in great.
Not since I was 19. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have one that you relate to more?
I used to think it was directing. I started off directing, I love directing, but I love show running the most. And that's mostly because it's kind of like directing, except without the, it's like, I like the ability to bring it's what you do as a director, basically, but it's in a much grander scale because you're dealing with a whole show. It's a lot of fun. I mean, for me, it's the most fun, but I still I'm on a couple of shows, I'm attached to a couple of things to direct. The problem with directing, or it became a problem for me, is that when you do a TV show, you have to commit to it, like years. Like you can't, if you run it, that's your show. When you direct, it takes you off the market for too long, which is why I kind of tapered back my directing, because I started getting such a hold in the other part of the industry. And I also saw that's where the industry was going. It was going much more towards Netflix and streamers, and that's where it went. But I've thought about that quite a bit. I go in and out of phases. Like like right now I'm really hankering to direct something, but I'm nervous about committing to directing it because I don't want any of my shows to sink. So it's always a balance. But even in my TV shows, I direct pilot, I direct the finale,
Okay.
which is not usual. A lot of showrunners don't direct as well, but some do. But I'm kind of an unusual case that way.
You still like directing. Has there been a time when you've wanted to get out of the industry
Oh,
and do something else?
that's an interesting question. I mean, yes and no. Yes, I can't imagine anyone's in anything that they're doing for their lives that doesn't think I want to do something else or live somewhere else. I have those moments. Yeah, I have those moments. The pandemic was really rough. The industry really, uh, tanked
Mm-hmm.
for that whole year. I was working. I'm going to be honest. I was working the whole year because I was doing the Paramount Plus show that I'm an EP on. But um, I have thought of that. Doing something creative is a very strange thing because you need to do it, and it's not logical because sometimes it's not enjoyable, and sometimes it's really soul crushing, and sometimes you have so little control over your future. Future, what I said, future. You have so little control over your future. Pretty much every other industry I can think of, if you do it correctly, you have control. If you really want to become bank manager, you know how to get there. It's not like you don't have control over that. If you really want to do something, if you're a fireman and you want to be chief one day, there are tests and there are the things you do to become that eventually. You can do a plan. You can't plan as much in this industry, and that's hard on people. It's hard on me sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Also, ideas are internal. They're a solitary thing. They're your notions, your fancies, your thoughts, your queries that you try to turn into an idea that's has legs, and that can be lonely, and that can be isolating. And if you're not good being isolated, uh, it's tough. Also, there is a lot, and when I say a lot, I mean a ton of rejection. And I was talking about how there were shows that didn't get picked up. J.J. Abrams had a show that didn't get picked up. It doesn't matter what level you're on. Of course, they're billionaires, so they're not as worried. But don't forget, they're just as crushed as anybody else when something doesn't go. It's a full of a lot of rejection. So you have to be of a certain mind. The good thing about a TV writer, which I've discovered and is important, is I know a guy, for example, who's a TV writer who's just retired, and he was just like, he's been a TV writer. He never wrote a pilot that really went, never created a show, never was a showrunner, but you can be so well employed as a TV writer. It's really good living. It's really good wages. It's wonderful. You might be writing someone else's show. You might be channeling someone else's characters and their tone, but it is a great living. And so you just decide what you want for yourself, and you have to know yourself. You have to know. I always knew in my 20s that if I did not create things that were being produced and actors reading my lines, I wasn't going to do it. And I started getting enough of that happening early enough that I felt like. But I also know, I have a friend of mine. He's never sold anything. He's never been credited with anything, and he's never had anything he's originally produced. But he has been hired to rewrite. He's had a couple of things sell, but he never was the eventual writer because it was rewritten. But he's made a great living. Mm-hmm. It's what do you need? What do you want in your life? And trying to figure that out sooner than later, so that if you want to pivot, you should pivot.
Looking at what's going to.
But the nature of creativity is unquantifiable. It's a need-based journey. I wished I didn't need to do it sometimes. I wished it would be so much easier to have chosen something else.
That's a good segue into this question. What suggestions do you have for someone just starting out in the industry?
Well, you right. Don't think that the one thing you wrote is great, and try to have 2 or 3 samples. You got to get repped by an agent, and to get repped by an agent, you almost always need more than 1 sample. I would suggest writing samples of shows, writing a show that you maybe can never even ever see being produced because it's so crazy, but it'll get someone's attention. Like you could never like you know what? No one's ever gonna make this. Don't write when you start out. You're in a vacuum. The vacuum you're in right now is you and trying to get people to have to pay attention to your writing. Okay, don't think bigger than that. Think about getting noticed. Okay, and the way you get noticed is you write something that's interesting and funny and weird enough. Like I read a spec, never got made, but it was so great. I wanted to hire this writer. She couldn't get hired because everyone wants to hire her. The spec was simple. The idea was simple. It was a half hour. It was about a small town and a woman, a girl, and it was about the whole town gets overrun by zombies. Now, zombies are played out, right? But her angle was that she was the only girl, a young woman, I would say, who had the antidote to the zombie infection. So she was never infected. And the only people beside her who weren't infected were all those people whose fluids she's shared with because they got her fluids and so they're inoculated. And she was really loose. So the only people in this small town who survived this apocalypse are her and her 10 ex-boyfriends because they all slept with her. And so it's her and these 10 guys and they're all her exes and they're fighting zombies. And it was crazy. And it was never going to get made because no one's making zombies really right now. But it was so wacky. You know, and I read another one recently that was also really, I read one that was so crazy that I came on as a writer and we are pitching it, but I'm not gonna talk about it, but right now, guys, do this, but I'm pitching it that was so crazy that I thought was so great that I came on and I helped direct it. And now we got Kenny Ortega, who is the director of, you know, Kenny Ortega did High School Musical. It's a musical show, but he's now directing, and I attached him as a director for the pilot. But so think of the craziest idea you can, as long as it fits into the format of a show, you know, and go for it. I read another one called Florida Woman. It's called Florida Woman. It was kind of inspired by all these crazy stories you hear about happening in Florida, the craziest, like, you know, stories of, you know, it was just about this poor, like, you know, couple who just takes on this biker gang, and it's so bloody and so crazy. But the writing is fun. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. So think of something that will get people's attention. Don't think of it like it has to get made. Think of it as it has to get their attention. So if it's about a girl who lives in Albuquerque and she just graduated college and she's working at her family's, you know, jewelry shop in Old Town, and then she meets a guy and the guy's from New York, and she decides that she wants to get out of this town, but she's never been outside of New Mexico. So it's about this kind of girl in New York. No, I've seen that. Like that's, you do write it about, right? Go big. Go big, you know, and that will get it noticed more.
And one of the things you brought up in the past is go big and don't look at, you know, everything basically has a comp, right? So it has ideas that people have familiarity with, but it brings something different and big, right?
Yeah,
So
I mean,
want something familiar.
I think that we,
but different.
Whatever you write is going to be familiar because that's just the way we are. We have a certain limited, on some level, when you see most of what you see on Netflix or on Hulu or wherever is in a certain box. There's different takes on that, but they're all kind of within the box, you know. And then you get a Ted Lasso, which is just a sweet, you know, comedy, heartfelt comedy, really all it is, by an American, you know, working for a British soccer team or football team. So, you know, but, you know, they were smart, fish out of water. How is this character, Ted Lasso, a simple, homespunny, you know, mid-America guy, interesting in the world of British soccer, right? It goes to my original point, you know, it doesn't matter what happens with that soccer team. You're pitching the character in the idea. And then you have the woman who owns the team who hired him just because she wanted to, she thought he'd fail, but he doesn't, now, some of these shows have the benefit of having showrunners and actors behind them, for which, if they did not have those people, would never have gotten bought. So I give that as a caveat, because we have to understand that if Bill Hader did not walk in with the creator of The Office and say, I want to do, I don't think it was The Office, it was something else, but basically come and said, I want to do a show about a hitman who joins an acting company, that would not probably have gotten made at HBO. It wouldn't have, but you don't think of that. Think of those as your comps. Because the more noisy your idea is, the more someone is going to say, if the writer can think so out of the box, I want to hire that writer to be in my writer's room.
Great. Okay. So they're in the writer's room. So let's talk about the writer's room now. In there, what happens in the writer's room, especially now with everything on Zoom? Are you still on Zoom?
Oh, you mean, well, there's two different questions. One's a general question. One is, in my last season, we started in a writer's room, and then we moved in March to Zoom, which was really rough. It's really exhausting. There's something about being in a room with a human being. You get done so much more done, and you have an interaction, and you can walk into each other's office and you can say, I have an idea. And most of the great ideas happen in between the times you're pitching them. But when you go on Zoom, part of it is you just think about it, then you get on Zoom and you present it, right? And it's weird. It's also exhausting looking at a screen, and it's triply exhausting looking at yourself. And I don't care who you are, you're looking at yourself when you're in those Zooms. Sometimes you try to look at your eyes go back and forth, but you're looking at, it's just too much. It's too much me. It's too much but when you're in a writer's room, technically we get together at 10 a.m. We have a board. Sometimes there's cards. Some people use whiteboards. I am partnered with Mark Cherry on a new idea that he's doing. He's the creator of Desperate Housewives, and we're working on a new pitch. But also the show that I'm working on for him is the Paramount Plus. I was brought on.
Women Kill, that one. Yeah.
That's Mark's. But he loves cards. In my rooms, I tend to do I like whiteboards, and you go episode to episode, so 1 through 10, and before you do that, though, you start with the arcs. So you have the card of the character and where they're going to go, A story, B story. You break down the character's storylines. So if you're doing Schitt's Creek, for example, what's what are the parents doing? What are the two kids doing? And then all of a sudden, season 2, now the David character is getting engaged, and so now what's that storyline? And she's going to go off to the Galapagos. What's that storyline? All those storylines of those separate characters you do in different rows. And then when you figure that out for the episode, so this is the episode where this occurs with this character, then the second line. And then what we do is we combine and see how they interact with each other. And do they touch? Do they not touch? How, that kind of thing. Also, a lot of the times it's about thinking how you can keep the stories connected to your central family, or your central, even an office show is about a family. How do we keep it connected to that office or that ER room or that Modern Family house for as long as possible? You do a show about a family. The reality of life, if you have kids, is you never see your kids. I mean, you just don't after a certain age. That's just the nature of things. A show is all about how do you defy that and see them all the time so you can interact with them. So it's a lot of plotting that out. But when you first start a series, you're usually thinking about the big arcs. Sometimes, depending on if you're doing a serialized show for Netflix, sometimes you're thinking about your ending, and then you're trying to lead up to that amazing ending. You know how you're going to be, and you're going to end. So how do we get our characters there? But we know where we're going to. It's always good to know where you're going to end up, in my opinion.
Right. So production.
I do that for like 20 weeks, and then depending on the room, there's different showrunners do different things. Mark, for example, I like to give each, so if we have 8 writers, I like to give at different levels of experience, from staff writer to associate producer to EPs, which are the upper level writers. I like giving each writer in the room their own script, and they go off and write it when we eventually have broken that episode, which means we figure that episode out. We know what's going on with each of those characters. Then that writer writes a treatment for that episode, and they go off and write that episode, and I give them notes, or the room gives them notes, right? Second way to do it, the way Mark does it, is that in each episode, there's a different storyline, and different writers write different storylines. And then he puts those storylines together in the one episode draft, and then he'll do a pass. But so if I'm really good at this character, I'll write this character, or this other person will write that other character. You know, that's how we do it in that room. We assign different storylines to different characters. In comedy rooms, real comedy rooms, literally, I've never, and I will say there's things I've never experienced because it seems ridiculous. It seems very hard for me to figure out how to do this. They literally write it on the board. They put it on a screen and they all like pitch jokes. Like, it's weird, but that's how they do it, you know. But that's less common now. That's more 3-camera, 4-camera. Mostly now it's either you're assigned it by the showrunner. That's your episode. That doesn't mean you came up with every idea in that episode. It just means you're writing that episode. Or 2, you are writing it by committee, but usually that's broken into character lines.
Okay. So in terms of the structure and the hierarchy, we have a question, related question. So production time, the person is asking, does the showrunner's direction supersede that of the director, which it does, right? But
Yeah.
how, I think, in terms of nuancing, you know, when you don't agree on the direction of the writing for a show.
Well, I don't agree.
Yeah, let's say you don't have, how do you handle conflicting, how do you handle conflict when you have differing?
Writers or directors?
Let's focus on directors, which is the question here.
I think it's really hard to be a director on someone else's TV show. It's
Yeah.
very, very, very hard. I hire directors on my show, and it's very hard because two things that are constants in a show. One is the look of the show. When I say the look of the show, it's not just the color, you know, spectrum of the show.
Sure.
Camera movement of the show, the mission statement for how we shoot the show is always set in stone. So what a director does, which is to subjectively tell a story, is usually kind of marginalized to the benefit of, you can't have one episode that looks like Ocean's 11 and the next episode looks like Frankie and Gracie. You just can't do that. And when you think about a show and you think that, oh, I've watched the season and it all flows, I can binge it.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like one person was behind all the visual of it. There wasn't one show that all of a sudden became grainy handheld and the rest was wide. It all felt like one show. But there was 10 different directors and they were all really well-known directors. You have to shoot within the mission, and that's usually set by the showrunner. And very often there's an executive producer director or a tonal director who's there all the time, who sets all of the tone with the directors. And so you're dealing with a lot of actors. It's a lot of acting notes. So the directors who used to be actors are very, very popular in TV because they're really great at talking to actors because they've been actors. And so that's a lot of what you're doing in TV direction. That's not necessarily true, let me say, with a lot of the bigger productions in TV, the Marvel shows and stuff that are like movies. Those directors are very visual, but they're all still, like I said, especially when you binge, you can't be, unless it's an intentional shift in the vibe of the show, you have to feel like you're watching the same show. So as a director, all the things that you usually want to bring to it, your insight and your inspiration, is really not going to work. If you want that big aerial shot, but there's no aerial shots in this, you're not going to get it, right?
Right, okay.
Conflict with a writer is different because in the end, the writer is frustrated, but that they're at the service of the showrunner. And it's part of it is frustrating, you know, it is frustrating. because you often disagree with the direction, you often disagree with the choice, and I, as a showrunner, can be wrong, and that writer, that staff writer, can be right. But that's just the way it is. That's why you're getting compensated to be in the room and to do the best you can and to make a good product.
Switching gears, we just have a few minutes left. Kind of the future of show running, pandemic, otherwise, and then also, of course, we have the IATSE strike authorization. Do you have any thoughts that you want to share with on that?
On the strike?
Yes. So the IATSE strike authorization vote is happening right now.
Oh,
I believe.
I don't know. I don't know how that's going to go. I'm
Yeah.
part of the WGA, and they asked us to walk out of our agencies 2 years ago, and we were all unrepresented, as you know, if you follow it. I can never know which way a union goes, but I'm a union guy, so I support whatever the unions feel is best for their community. And I think they should get. I'm not as educated on those things, but my instinct is always give it to them. And I say give it to them because the studios and the networks make so much flipping money. I mean, what they're usually asking for is so small. I mean, in the end, it's just ridiculous that we still have these fights. There's very few. And it's very hard as a writer too with these streamers because you don't make any of the back end. All of my residual checks from the WGA are from things I did years ago. You don't get those anymore because there's not the same residual stream as there used to be.
And I know for the IATSE strike authorization, from my understanding, there was an article in Deadline that posted yesterday, and it talked about, this requiring meal breaks in the 70 to 80 hour work weeks, and an insurance, paying back an insurance deficit without charging IATSE members more money. So your point was,
they're going to get it. I just, without the everything will halt. Filming will stop. I mean, and we're just getting going. Meal breaks I mean, yes, they should have it. They should have meal breaks. I will say, the problem with this industry is it's a top down. As a showrunner, I've had moments where I could say I would almost acknowledge that you by the nature of directing a film or a show, you're abusing the crew, and regardless of how well they're paid, you're just their well-being and their exhaustion level. You're exhausted, but you can't stop because of the pressure from the top, because you have to get so much done, and that's the balance that you're always that's on you as a showrunner, is to try to schedule it correctly. But there is no such thing as scheduling it correctly. There's not a production that doesn't go over. There's no production where somebody says we did 9 hours every single 35 days of 8.5 hours, and we were home and tucked in bed at hour 11. I mean, I've never heard of that happening ever. So the more breaks you can build into it, I think the better. Yeah.
Do you feel more pressure as a showrunner coming out of the pandemic and, of course, the COVID?
Yeah, it's very nerve-wracking. When we were shooting Why Women Kill, we were all in double masks, and it's still that way a little bit. It's so tense. You create a bubble around the actors because they're the only people who are unmasked, and you go in pods, meaning only a certain amount of people are allowed on the set, and they're designated. Those people are double masked and shielded often. And still there was positive COVID pretty much all over the place, controlled, but positive. It's been really, really nerve-wracking and very counter to anything creative. I mean, things are being made and things are great, and we're still seeing good content, but it's really very little that we've seen. We did our show Why Women Kill all during the pandemic at the height of it, and we were all on sound stages, and it was Oh, it was crazy. It was like, oh, a van driver tested positive and they were carrying and then you're shut down. So I would say that to each episode that we had last year, because of the COVID shutdowns and the periodic shutdowns, it was about 100 grand per episode more that was added to the budget. So almost 1 million more for last year, based just on the COVID of it.
Wow. So is there, this kind of, it's going back, this is a new question from the audience, going back to what we were discussing earlier about a director, the showrunner, making sure that each director who comes in is offering the same consistent tone for the show. And applying this also to, especially now with all the pressure you feel that's added from the pandemic as a showrunner. Do you have some sort of lookbook for types of shots and movements for the show in general? Are there?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's not to say when you meet with the director, you're not trying to encourage creativity, but usually two things happen. They've seen the show, or at least they've seen a few episodes. You talk about lens choice. It's really, to me, more about the cinematographer. You want the cinematographer is the one who's there I like to have the same DP, or there's usually 1 or 2 DPs for the whole run of it. If it's an 8 to 10 episode now, it's like 8 to 10, 5, 2 DPs, sometimes 1 DP. They control the look of it. And they're very often telling the director, we don't do that. Like, quote, we don't do that as part of what you do. And you do supply the directors with lookbooks, and you go over their shot list with them. And, I think I overcorrected a little bit. I have some regrets in my first season about how I dealt with directors, because I wanted the look to be I wanted them to get all the, you also have to be on top of them with the schedule. They have to shoot. If it's demanding, they need to be fast. If they're a slow director, you're in trouble. Like very often when you hire a TV director, you ask people who've worked with them, how fast are they,
Great. We just have a few minutes left. We have that concludes the questions from the audience. Is there anything that you feel is kind of the single most important piece of advice that you have for a filmmaker just starting out to, whether they want to be a showrunner or not? What's your advice to somebody in the industry?
I think it's hard, but I would suggest, I've been asked this before, and I've tried to understand, because it's really hard. Because the reality is this: you need your scripts represented by an agent. If you're an actor, you need to be represented by an agent. Period. And those actors who are not represented by certain agents will feel the isolation of not being part of what one would say are the top 7 or 8 agencies. They're not simply just not being sent out for jobs they should be sent out to. That's just the nature of the game. Living in Los Angeles when you're starting out, I think is, I would recommend. When you're starting, yeah, I just don't see, it's an industry town. If you wanted to make cars, would I live in, I would live in Detroit, if that's where after college, after my degree, after my engineering and my car design degree, I moved to Detroit, and I would see if I could, or I would, I think, and I would start working in the industry. So you write, you try to get an agent, and as you're doing that, get a position as an assistant to an agent, get in a position as an assistant to a producer or a director or a writer, get on a set, figure out what that is. If you don't want to move out of New Mexico, you know how much is shot in New Mexico. Get on a crew, get in the office, or become part of the office. Watch as things are getting done, But if you're a TV writer, that's different than film. There really is only one place. That's LA and New York, mostly LA. That's where you're in a room. You can't get that in New Mexico. That is not like film. You can't be in an office. If you want that has to happen here, and you have to come here. There really is no gray area in a showrunner. I have people who are from here. I have a friend of mine. She's desperate to go to Washington, D.C. with her husband. She cannot move. Like, it's hard. And I will be honest with. If you want to work in a writer's room, you must live in Los Angeles, at least at the beginning. By the way, Zoom is going to change that, so I can't predict that. If you ask, so who knows what we do? But let's hope the pandemic goes away fast, and we all can be back in a room together. And I really appreciate the ability to speak with you and everybody. And please, if anybody has wants to speak to me, you guys have my email, and if you just email me if you'd like to reach out to me if there's a question or further you want something read. Ivan, and he has my information.
Well, thank you, Josh. You were very generous with your time today. Really appreciated it, and you just it was chock full of so much information. I forgot to tell people to have a pen and paper handy for your discussion, but hopefully people did. I just you had a quote. I just want to end it with before we hand it back over to Kira to close things out here. And Ivan, you mentioned when you were making Jobs, or after you had made Jobs. Jobs said at the end of the movie, when you realize that the world was created by people no smarter than you, your life will change. Yeah. And so I think
you're just one idea away from your career. Yeah. One idea away from your career.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We really appreciate your time today. It was really great. Great to speak with you.
Sure.
And Kira, you're on mute. Oh my God, the first technical no, right? Josh and Genevieve, thank you so much for that wonderful conversation. And yes, if you forgot to write down any notes, we have this conversation recorded and it will be available online until October 11th. Stay tuned for our next center stage conversation at 2:00 Mountain Standard Time with Snuffy Waldron, one of the greatest TV composers that we know. Tune in for that. And if you have any other questions about tickets and programming, visit us at afmxnm.com. Thanks, and we'll see you next.